This is the fourth part of the John and Crane story. Absolutely nobody has reviewed or commented or anything at all, so I'm not really sure why I'm doing this, but I guess I'm just gonna finish it, so someday maybe somebody will comment. Okay. John woke up the next morning, feeling rested for the first time in a long time. Stretching his stiff muscles, John climbed out of his generic bed. But today, it didn't seem so generic. Today, John started noticing about his apartment that he hadn't before. He noticed subtle things, like small cracks in the ceiling and little dings and stains on his bed and dresser. As John brushed his teeth in the sink, he noticed his toilet was not really white, but a very pale green color. While eating his breakfast in the kitchen, John found that his cupboards had different handles on a few of them. There was a nick in the black and white linoleum by the sink. John kept on noticing these things. And, all the while, John was smiling. He noticed that as well. Because it was a Sunday, and John was not particularly religious, John had nothing planned for that day. Normally, he would think about his unending patterns, clean his apartment, and watch a lot of TV. But this was not normal. John cooked himself a very fancy breakfast. He made an omelet with pieces of smoked salmon, green onions, and Havarti cheese. Sitting at his small table, John considered today's possibilities. He almost decided to go for another walk, but it was raining today, and John did not really like the rain. Just as John was about to give up and retreat to his television, he had an idea. His apartment really needed some more art. Crane woke up shivering. It was drizzling, and a little bit of water had leaked in from the grimy tarp that acted as her roof. Groaning, Crane shuddered out of her blankets. She pulled a thick green woolen jacket over her thin black camisole. Crane was hungry. She rummaged around in her many assorted backpacks for some food. Finding several granola bars given to her by a kind individual, Crane feasted. She brought out her sketchbook and began to draw out a picture of John. John with his slight, sad smile and thoughtful eyes. John in his gray turtleneck and green corduroys and brown loafers. John in his somewhat muted emotions. John in his unexplainable instinct to hide away his own individuality, even from himself. John in his small yet broad outlook on life. John had no idea how to paint. He had only taken one semester of it in high school, and he remembered none of it. Deciding to just wing it, John took a cab down to the closest art supply store. He bought many large tubes of paint. He bought tiny brushes that contained only a few bristles. He bought very large brushes that could cover a lot of room. He bought every brush size in between. When John gravely walked up to the counter, he ignored the severely raised eyebrows of the clerk and concerned himself with writing a check for $200. Paint sure were expensive. John decided to walk home from the art store. He had spent a ridiculous amount of money, and he did not feel like paying the small cab fare. Plus, the rain had let up momentarily, and John wanted to be able to think about what he wanted to paint. So, slowly walking underneath as many awnings as he could to avoid the depressing, incessant patter of rain trickling from the sky, John made a simple pattern of stride left, stride right, longer stride left, stride right, and on. Slowly ideas formed in his head, whilst the pattern slowly flowed in the back of his mind, over and over and over. Some of John's ideas were impossible for his limited talent to produce without embarrassing his walls, and he knew it. Other ideas were well in his range of ability, like small stars of varying colors, or a blast of golden-orange peace signs slamming across the wall, slightly more oval than circular ones, with a multitude of small gold sparkles dusting the edges of it. John's ideas started slipping into images of Crane. Crane in her small black camisole, Crane in her beautiful light chestnut hair, Crane in her broad, wicked grin. John walked past his house, lost in thought. He had to turn around and walk back quicker than before, 13 blocks. When John finally reached his apartment, he was very wet. John decided to take a bath in his cramped little bleach white tub with his slightly greenish toilet and pale yellow tiles. John kept noticing these things, but he did not know why. He was barely even conscious that he was noticing them at all. John started to paint at around 6 o'clock in the evening. He decided to start to paint in his bathroom because it was small, very boring, and he did not need to spend very much time in it if it turned out that he disliked his own art. John sat atop of a small gray futon and thought. He thought long and hard. He was very involved in this thinking process. He was not half-hearted about it at all. He did not even think of patterns. So John planned what he would paint. He wanted this to be a project, not just something to fill up a night. So, when he finally started, John was very careful. And so ends part 4. I really like what happens later on, because it starts like getting more plottish and less crappish. But, yeah, not much to say.